Each year, over 4,000 Canadians lose their lives to suicide. That's about 12 people per day. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among youth and young adults, and rates are highest among men, Indigenous communities, and those sidelined by society or coping with mental health challenges. The COVID-19 pandemic has added layers of stress and isolation, with 1 in 10 Canadians reporting thoughts of suicide since 2020. The impact of suicide ripples across families, friendships, classrooms, and workplaces. For every loss, it's estimated more than 100 people are profoundly affected, carrying grief, confusion, and unanswered questions with them. Maybe you are one of these people. Grief after such tragedy is deep and complex, often bringing persistent sadness, isolation, and changes in daily life. Stigma, social pressure, and lack of understanding can make it even harder to heal. In the face of such loss, compassionate support and practical strategies truly matter, and they are available. Welcome to Beyond the Surface. Today I have the honor of welcoming Dr. Sherbino. Welcome. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for being here. We're going to discuss such an important topic. And before we talk about it, we're going to watch a story of someone who has experienced recently loss to suicide. Let's watch it together.
What could I have done to stop my son from killing himself? How could I miss the warning signs? I thought I was supporting my family, but it turns out I wasn't the support he needed. I missed too much. I should have paid more attention. I should have been around more. What kind of father am I? I see the other parents look at me with questions. What did you do? What didn't you do? I can't stand their judgment. I already judge myself. My wife keeps trying to get me to do counseling. But if I can't even talk to her or my friends, how is a stranger going to help me? This is something I have to face alone. For my family's sake, I need to pull myself together. But how on earth do I move past my son's death, especially when it's my fault?
Welcome back. Today we'll be discussing a very crucial topic, but very sensitive at the same time. And if you find that this show is triggering to you, I advise you to call this number that's showing on the screen, because there's help for you. So if you find that it's a difficult topic and you need support is available. So I'm here with Dr. Sherbino. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We're going to talk about grief from a different perspective now, from someone who has experienced a loss to suicide. How is that different than grief per se?
Well, in some ways, a lot of the factors will be the same, but in other ways, it is different and more difficult. When you think about suicide, someone that you know, maybe it's a family member, and if it is that, then it's obviously very close to your heart. We are left with the question, why did they find life so difficult that they choose to end life? And for many of the survivors of someone who has died by suicide, that is the big question. Why did they do it? And somehow in our whole human nature, we want to have an answer. We're trying to make sense out of something that doesn't make sense. And that is huge. But on the other hand, it is very difficult for some of the survivors of someone who has died by suicide to grieve properly, because there's an element of shame around that type of death. And they find it very difficult to speak about what actually took place. And when you think about shame, they might be thinking, how does this reflect upon us as a family or as a friend? Or what does the community think about us? And were we there for our loved one or not? And so it is hard for a lot of people to bring up the topic of suicide. And I can tell you that it takes courage to be willing to be somewhat transparent in this regard. At one time, some people tried to find other ways of expressing what had actually taken place, mainly to save face in some cultures, or they didn't want it known so that maybe they would not receive the financial remuneration from the life insurance policy if someone had died by suicide. Now that has changed radically in many insurance policies. I know, for example, in one place, if you have a life insurance policy you've maintained it for at least a year and you died after that year, the insurance is all paid out. But in the past, it might not have been that way. But there is such a stigma around taking one's life. And we see this actually throughout history and how the culture has tried to discourage suicide in a lot of ways that actually didn't work.
Can you give me some examples of that?
Well, in the old days, back in England, if you committed suicide, your body was left outside the city, often at crossroads, and they would allow the animals and the birds to consume what was left.
As a sign to society, right?
A sign to society that this is not approved. And they hoped that that would discourage it. It didn't discourage it. All it did was bring more trauma and guilt to the survivors and the family members, and probably was horrible for people to see. Years gone by in the Catholic Church, if you died by suicide, you were not allowed to be buried in the church or in what they called consecrated ground. So this would be ground, cemeteries in the Catholic tradition, they have a service of consecration and the believers are baptized in there, but you would be baptized outside the consecrated area, which became another demarcation indicating that you were not quite accepted. And therefore, this put all kinds of stress on family members. It was very, very hard for them to be able to deal with that. Now, I think the ruling in the Catholic Church has changed. 1961, they started to bring about some changes in some of their beliefs and some of their theology.
And I think now we have a better understanding as to why it would lead someone, at least emotionally, to do such thing, right?
Well, I think we're much more aware of mental health issues. And our culture today is not frowning upon mental health in the way it once did. Although, even speaking as a psychotherapist, there is a certain stigma attached to people going to get help for emotional, psychological, relational problems. If I broke my arm, it would be not considered shameful to walk around in public with a cast where the bones are trying to mend. But how do you describe someone who is broken emotionally or broken psychologically and the struggles they are facing? Whether it could be from, even having to take certain drugs the rest of their life to maintain a certain level of equilibrium in their emotional and mental health well-being. So we are much more familiar with the issue of schizophrenia and bipolar, and the list can go on, the struggles that people are encountering. And sometimes the emotional pain becomes so great that many figure there's really no way out. And so they can't take that kind of pain in their life. And so some will choose to end their life by suicide.
And that's so challenging because usually for that person to decide that, they've reached the rock bottom emotionally, right? They're
Exactly.
not well.
Yeah, they're at rock bottom. They're not thinking clearly, and they think this is the only way out or the only way forward for them to be able to do that.
And even with that knowledge, those who might have lost someone to suicide may not have the left brain thinking those things, right?
Yeah, so they're not able to see from a logical perspective that this is going to get better. They're just being overwhelmed by the emotion of what they're actually experiencing. But sometimes they can be very logical and reasonable in their thinking. And One of the things that I have found, and I have worked with people who have attempted suicide, and I've worked with people who have actually committed suicide. And it's quite interesting that when they get to that point of making a decision, it's usually pretty difficult to change their mind. Before that, when they're ambivalent, they're wondering, is this right? Is this right? Is this going to provide a way out or not? In that area of that time period of ambivalence, you often have a greater opportunity to be able to work with them. But once someone has made a decision to suicide, it's pretty hard to change their mind because suddenly they have an inner peace. That, in other words, I have made a decision or a choice, and this is going to be done. Now they just have to figure out how they're going to do it. And sometimes that's already thought through beforehand.
They have a plan sometimes. And for those who stay, what are the challenges they experience once they lost someone who killed themselves, who committed suicide?
Well, for the survivors for someone who has committed suicide, it becomes very challenging. For some, there is the huge question of why. Why did they do it? There's another question of guilt. Did I do enough? Or did I see the signs and do nothing? Or how could I have missed the signs of suicide? And then for others, there could be the issue of shame. This has brought shame on our family. And there are cultures that are shame-based. And you do everything to prevent your family name from being an item of shame. And so you look at that, and then you're going to find that there's a lot of anger. Sometimes that comes out later on. I'm angry that you did this to me. I have to live with all of these feelings now. Who knows for how long? Maybe the rest of my life. How could you do this to me and to my family? And I've often noticed when I'm working with people that this sense of anger can flare up in a lot of different ways and at different times. And it's not quickly resolved.
That's very interesting. We're going to go for a quick break and we'll be back. But before we go on the break, I just want to invite you, if you need help, there's a phone you can call here on the screen. Please call if you find that this topic is too hard for you or in need of support. And we'll be right back after the break.
In a Canada facing uncertainty,
we believe there's more to life.
From mental health to faith journeys.
From finding purpose to discovering love's perspective.
Hope Channel Canada brings light to life's deepest questions.
Because there's more to your story.
Hope Channel Canada, there's more to life.
Visit hopetv.ca.
Welcome back. Thank you for watching Beyond the Surface. We're so thrilled you're with us today. And I want to tell you something. We want to hear from you. We want to hear your comments. We want to hear your suggestions for show topics and things like that. Also, if you want to share your own story, your own journey, we would love to hear from you. So please write us at info@hopetv.ca. And I'm back here with you, Dr. Sherbino. So we're talking about suicide today. And part of talking about it, it's about suicide prevention maybe, right? What are some signs we look for that might be important for us to pay attention to as we're trying to prevent suicide in our loved ones or families?
Well, the topic is one which I think is really critical to be aware of. And not everybody is able to identify the signs simply because sometimes they don't know about them. And when someone does die by suicide, you often hear people say, but we didn't see any indication that this was coming. We didn't know that this was a struggle this person was having. So one of the things that there are a number of things you can look for. First of all, does the person ever refer to, I'd be better off not being here? Or using that kind of language, you would be better off without me. So that kind of language is throwaway statements. And I would begin to simply say, what do you mean by that? Or can you tell me a bit more about what you're thinking? And then if they do so, talk a bit more, well, they might say, I'm not able to get a job. My health is declining. I've been here. I'm kind of like, I feel like I'm a nuisance. I would ask them directly, have you ever thought about committing suicide? Or have you ever thought about taking your own life? And it's quite interesting. They will be quite honest with you and say, yeah, I've thought about it. So that could be one way. Another way is that you notice that the person seems to be quite ambivalent. And they're going one way and another way. But then suddenly, they seem to have a sense of peace about them. Or they have a new sense of direction. That could be a sign. What has brought this about? The third one is they might be trying to tie up loose ends. It could be something as simple as, I want to make sure my room is tidy. Or, I need to return these books to the library. And they've been sitting there for weeks. And there's way past due dates, right? So you see these little signs, you wonder, what is that happening? Now, it's not just the one sign. It is a collection of usually a number of signs. So I'm going to give you an illustration that I actually encountered. I was seeing a woman, she was a nurse, who was suffering from depression. Now, she was under a doctor's care, a medical doctor, and yet things were not going well. So just having medication is often not enough. We need to have medication with counseling or therapy for many people. And she was dealing with a lot of things. And so one day she said, I'm in a really bad state. And we talked about it. And I said, are you thinking about taking your life? And she said, yes, I am. So there goes up one red flag. The second question I asked is this: have you thought about how you are going to do it? She said, yes, I have. Third question, what is it and is it readily available? She said, I'm going to take the car and I'm going to drive it into a bridge abutment because I wanted to make it look like an accident so my family will not have to deal with the reality of how I'd taken my life. Now I got 3 major red flags. Then I said, when do you think you're going to do it? She said, well, I got to wait for a rainstorm to make the road look slippery. And we've been experiencing a drought. Hadn't rained in 3 or 4 weeks. And so that now took the threat level down. But I knew these things were going to happen. Another situation was I was dealing with this person, and they were committed to the act of suicide. And I asked the question, have you thought about suicide? Yes. Have you thought about how you're going to do it? Yes. How are you going to do it? I'm going to take pills. Do you have them? She said, I got them here in my purse. I said, where did you get them? She said, they've been prescribed for something by my doctor, and I've just been collecting until I have enough. So I knew that was high alert. And I said, I'm not going to allow you to leave this office. So I called her husband, said, you need to come and pick up your wife from my office. We're going to take her to the hospital, and she will be admitted. So she was put on what they call a suicide watch. And she got the help that she needed. And we continue with the counseling. And the woman who was going to drive into the bridge and the woman who was going to end her life with pills are living very happy lives to this day because that was caught.
Such hopeful stories.
There are other people you miss. A young woman in my congregation when I was just beginning in ministry came to see me. She was a student at the university in that city. And she was struggling with identity issues, as a lot of university students do, and particularly as a young woman, the whole issue of body imagery, am I liked and whatnot. And so we were working through some of those problems that she was encountering. It came time for the summer break, and she was going to be away. And it's about 4 months in university. And she said, I'll pick up in the fall when I come back. I would see her parents from time to time, and say, how is X doing? And they say, oh, she seems to be doing well. On the opening days of the fall, she had registered at the university, and she jumped from the residency building to her death. When I conducted her funeral, she was weighing about 100 pounds more after 4 months. Now, the family didn't think anything about this weight gain. I mean, before she was very petite and very much active in her lifestyle. But to gain 100 pounds in a few months, that's unheard of. Something must be wrong. And they missed it. And I felt badly that I had missed it, but I had never seen it because she had been away for 4 months. And so sometimes we need to make sure that there are indicators that we notice are different and start to ask some of those questions and just to see what people are going to do. Now, sometimes people will not tell you the truth. One case, this person was on medication for bipolar disorder, and they had some tendencies towards suicide. And I asked them this question, are you taking your medication? And they said, yes, I am. I am taking it all the time. Now, they had a medical background, and they knew what could happen if they didn't. But they virtually swore that they were taking their medication. In reality, they weren't. They were putting it in another drawer. And their family members didn't find that out until after their death.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, sometimes, yeah, that makes sense. There's a variety of experiences there.
And now you see the family are angry that she lied to them. They're angry because their life is now in turmoil. They are stricken with grief because they have lost this lovely person in their life. But now they're dealing with all these mixed emotions. And that's part of the grieving process that we have to walk through. And maybe it's helping that family to be able to articulate, first of all, their anger towards their loved one who has suicided, and how it has impacted their life. And sometimes we're not comfortable having people do that part of the therapy.
Yeah. And I really appreciate you saying that. We're now going to hear from a couple of friends who have something to share about that topic as well. I want to invite Mike and Pam to share their perspectives on the topic of today's show.
I'm going to be very vulnerable with you. There was a time where I needed to have some help from a psychiatrist to navigate some of the experiences and the feelings that I was going through after the loss of my father. Sometimes you think that you're going crazy, and the stigma of getting psychiatric help is such a barrier to so many people getting help. I never wanted to harm myself, but the thoughts were, why? Why bother? Like, my daddy's gone. I'm not daddy's little girl anymore. What do I have to live for?
That's right.
I remember as a child that the little whispers that you would hear around the family circle when somebody had passed away from suicide. And I know that that's a struggle for a lot of people. How do we reconcile that today?
I think that a part of the problem here comes from a teaching that says that suicide is the unpardonable sin. Actually, that's not a biblical concept. It comes from Dante's Inferno. That's the first time it really entered into the broader Christian conversation. When you look at Scripture, there are 7 recorded instances of suicide. Not one of them is condemned. Judas is condemned for his betrayal of Jesus, but not for his suicide. You see, suicide usually follows a long-term severe depression. And one of the things you lose in depression is the ability to think logically. Logical thought goes out the window, and you begin to look at a permanent solution like suicide as being the logical choice when everyone else knows that's not logical. And it's a bad choice. So the question is, would God hold you responsible for making a bad choice when you don't have the mental capacity to know right from wrong or good choice from bad choice? And the answer is no. Suicide is actually the result, the symptom, the final stage, a symptom of a long-term disease of depression, severe depression. And so if you're grieving the loss of a suicide, I'm asking you, don't complicate that with the thoughts that I'll never see my loved one again. That's just simply not necessarily the case. God's love for that individual is bigger than you've ever dreamed possible. So if you're thinking about suicide, here's what we want you to take away from this. If you're thinking about suicide, get help. If you know of someone who's thinking about suicide and intervention is necessary, that means seek help, get professional opinions, get some help. But if you're grieving someone who died at their own hand because of suicide, do not complicate your grief with the thought that this person is eternally lost. That's just not necessarily the case. It is quite possible you will see each other again.
Thank you, Mike and Pam, for sharing your thoughts with us. We're coming up to an end. Unfortunately, this topic, we have so much to talk about. What are your final considerations on this topic?
My final thing is this: be open to talk about what you're experiencing as survivors. And I speak from personal experience. 2 years ago, my own daughter-in-law took her life by suicide. She left 3 young children and my son. So we know what it's like to walk through the pain of suicide death. But we have made a decision that we will not be secretive. We will be open and we will talk about it. And we will talk about the memories, the struggles, the good things and the bad things. So even with my grandchildren, when they want to talk about it, we talk about it. When they don't want to talk about it, we don't talk about it. But we find that it comes very naturally. So at various anniversary times, we talk about the life we shared together. The children and my son and I and my wife and his brother and their family, we've often gone together to the grave. And we have prayers that we offer. We share words with one another about how we miss her in our life. And the great thing is that we're able to commend her into the care of God. She was struggled with some mental health issues in her life, even though she was under the care of medical providers and she was in the field of medicine herself. Suicide can happen to any family, any place, at any time. It doesn't depend on your social, economic background, your educational background, or your financial background. We all struggle. And so if we all struggle, we all need to help one another in this journey.
Thank you for sharing your story with us, Dr. Sherbino. So powerful. For supports, for people who are in need of support, do you have any suggestions?
Well, one of the suggestions I can offer is that at Tyndale University, we have established a Center for Grief and Loss. Everything is offered online, so it doesn't matter where you are in Canada or in the world, you can access these resources. And we have grief recovery groups that will be glad to welcome you at any time, wherever you are.
Thank you so much. And thank you for watching us. We'll see you next time on Beyond the Surface.